Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to listen not just with your ears, but with your heart. For tonight we embark upon a journey not merely across the Atlantic, but through time, through spirit, through the great questions that echo across the seas of our souls. It was a night shrouded in elegance and pride. The year was 1912, a time when man believed he was master of his fate and captain of his soul. The world had seen revolutions, inventions, rising towers of industry, and the iron might of progress marching forward. And in that proud march a ship was born, Titanic, her name echoing through the halls of man's greatest aspirations. They called her Unsinkable. Imagine that, with steel and steam, wealth and wisdom, they believed they had built a vessel beyond the touch of nature itself. She was not merely a ship. She was a floating kingdom, a monument to man's brilliance, a city upon the sea. And oh, how she sparkled in the April sun as she left Southampton for New York. There were the rich in their velvet and pearls, and there were the poor with dreams folded in their hearts like hidden letters from heaven. But let me tell you something, my friends. No ship, no tower, no mighty work of man can sail beyond the reach of God. No matter how fine the design, how strong the hull, how confident the minds that made her. There is one who rules above the waters, and he alone holds the compass of eternity. And as she sailed, there was music on the decks. Violins wept sweet notes into the salt air. There were laughter and toasts, crystal glasses lifted high, as though they could lift themselves beyond the grip of fear, beyond sorrow, beyond judgment. The mighty engines roared like thunder beneath the feet of the passengers, and no one believed they were racing toward silence. But my friends, life is not merely about the journey we see with our eyes. There is another voyage taking place in every soul aboard every ship, every life that crosses the great ocean of existence. And on that voyage storms will come. Ice will appear not only in seas, but in hearts, in homes, in the choices we make. Aboard the Titanic were men and women just like you and me. Some had wealth so vast they could buy anything, except more time. Others had nothing but hope and a one-way ticket to a new world, and in God's eyes they were equal. The ocean made no distinction that night. It did not pause to ask if one wore a crown or a collar, a silk dress or patched trousers. The cold water embraced all with the same indifference. But even in that darkness, oh, listen to me, even in the frozen shadow of death, there were lights shining. There was courage, there was love, there was sacrifice. A preacher stood on deck, holding fast to his Bible. He did not flee, he did not panic. He called out to men and women, offering not panic, but peace. He preached the hope of heaven. He preached salvation, not in lifeboats, but in the arms of the eternal Savior. And even as the ship groaned and tilted, even as men ran screaming and the night tore itself open with fear, he offered the one thing no iceberg could crush, faith. There were men who gave up their seats in lifeboats for women and children. There were fathers who kissed their wives and sons goodbye, tears freezing on their cheeks. There were crewmen who stayed behind to keep the lights burning, so others might find their way to safety. These were not perfect people. They were not heroes by title, but in that hour of testing their souls were revealed, and let me tell you, it is in the hour of testing when we see who we truly are. You may think you are strong because your life is sailing smooth. But wait until the waves rise, wait until your plans fall apart, until your dreams sink beneath you like shattered hulls. It is then that you'll know whether your hope is built on sand or on the rock of ages. As the clock ticked past 11:30 p.m. on that cold April evening, the stars sparkled above with indifferent clarity. The sea was calm, too calm, like a canvas stretched too tight. The air was crisp, and the moon absent, casting shadows long and cold across the decks. The great ship surged forward at full speed, as though rushing to meet her fate, and then, without trumpet or thunder, she struck, not with a boom but with a groan, a scrape, a sound like steel tearing at the edge of time. Most did not even stir. A few felt a tremor beneath their feet. Some were awoken by the shudder, curious but not afraid. For had they not been told she was unsinkable, had they not read the papers and seen the pride of man inked across every page? But below the decks, in the bowels of the ship, the truth had begun to whisper. Water, cold, dark, relentless, cascading in, seeking every corner, every crevice. Steel may bend, steel may break, but water will find a way. And in just moments, the crewmen who had stoked the great fires with sweat and soot now faced an enemy that would not be burned back. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, walked the corridors, not in panic, but in purpose. He had built her, and now he would die with her. He did not waste time arguing with the tide. He put life belts in hands. He pointed the way to safety. And when the hour grew late, he was last seen in the first-class smoking room, standing alone, eyes fixed on a painting of a coastline he would never reach. Do you hear that, even in the final hour, some chose duty over dread? Service over survival, let us not forget them. And up on the decks, the dance of human nature unfolded in all its terrible beauty. There were those who rushed the lifeboats, pushing past children. There were those who hoarded, who cursed, who wept. But there were also those who knelt, yes, knelt and prayed. A band asked to play to calm the crowd began with light tunes, but as the tilt of the ship grew steeper, they chose instead a melody of eternal peace, nearer, my God, to thee. Picture that. As the sea claimed its prize, the music rose. It did not scream, it did not resist. It wept like a prayer on the wind. I tell you, my friends, if ever there was a moment when heaven bent low to hear the cries of mankind, it was that night. Now think of the lifeboats. There were not enough. Oh no, not nearly enough. Because they believed they didn't need them. Because they believed in their own strength more than in preparing for the unexpected. Pride had planned the voyage, and pride had cut the number of lifeboats in half to keep the decks tidy. How many of us live like that, stripping away the very things that could save us because they don't seem necessary, until the hour we need them most. The boats that did launch were filled with a strange silence. Some floated half empty, some turned back, some did not, but every one of them watched as the great ship groaned, tilted, and finally broke, splitting in two like a soul torn by grief. And then came the cries. My friend, have you ever heard the sound of 1,000 souls calling out at once? It was not the wind. It was not the sea. It was the sound of men, women, and children caught between two worlds. And yet, in that agony, in that ocean of fear, still some called not for help, but for God. Yes, even in the waters, even as the cold clawed at their breath, some lifted their eyes to the heavens. Because when all is stripped away, when wealth, status, and pride are gone, what remains is the eternal cry of the human soul for hope. The cries echoed through the stillness like the tolling of a bell across an empty valley, waves of desperation crashing louder than the sea itself. Some screamed for their children, some for their mothers, some for mercy, and yet woven among those cries were voices praying, singing, clinging to hope in the face of certain death. And then, just as swiftly, the cries began to fade. Not because the sea had grown still, but because the voices were swallowed by it. Hypothermia came like a thief in the night. No fanfare, no ceremony, just silence. The kind of silence that lingers in your bones long after the sound has ceased. But hear me when I say this. That silence was not the end of their story. You see, the Titanic sank beneath the surface of the Atlantic, yes, but the souls aboard did not. They entered eternity, and in that moment, all of man's distinctions were erased. The richest man aboard and the humblest servant stood on equal ground before their Maker. Gone were the diamonds, the titles, the compartments that separated first class from third. There was only one class now, the class of humanity, naked before heaven, measured not by gold or gowns, but by grace. We live in a world today where the decks are still divided. Some dine on silver platters while others scrape by. But I tell you, storms are coming. Icebergs still drift in the dark. And the things we trust in, the things we think will carry us safely across this ocean of life, may not be enough. Where is your trust, my friend? Is it in the strength of your own hands, in your bank account, your education, your social standing? The Titanic teaches us this. All of that can be lost in a single night. But there is one thing that cannot be taken by the waves: faith. Faith is the lifeboat that never fails. It does not depend on steel or rivets or design. It depends on the one who walks upon the waters. Oh, how those lifeboats drifted in the darkness, carrying mothers cradling their babies, men wrapped in coats, trembling not from cold alone, but from awe. They watched the place where the ship had stood, now gone, only the stars above and the sea beneath, and for 2 long hours they waited, for light, for sound, for salvation, and then, just as despair began to settle, a ship appeared. The Carpathia. She had turned around. She had steamed full speed through dangerous ice fields, her captain driven by something more than duty. He was driven by compassion, and when he arrived, he did not find a ship. He found sorrow. One by one, the survivors were pulled from the lifeboats, eyes vacant, fingers blue. Some wept, some were silent, some looked back across the waves where their families had vanished, but all had one thing in common: they had been saved. Let me ask you this: are you in the lifeboat, or are you still clinging to the rail of something you believe cannot sink? Are you still trusting in the unsinkable structures of your own making, because life will hit you? Maybe not with ice, but with illness, with loss, with betrayal, with the sudden emptiness of a tomorrow you counted on. And when that moment comes, you won't need a grand ship. You'll need a savior. When the Carpathia arrived in New York, it did not bring a celebration. It brought mourning, it brought questions, it brought headlines soaked in sorrow. The world stopped, not just for the number of lives lost, but because something had been shattered deep in the heart of humanity: the illusion of control. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a symbol of progress, of pride, of the belief that we had finally tamed the wild forces of creation. But that night we were reminded we are not the masters of the deep. Crowds gathered at the piers, clutching letters, photos, names on lists. Some would fall to their knees in grief. Others would rejoice as their loved ones stepped off those lifeboats. But for many, silence would be the only reply. Now, some asked, where was God that night? Let me tell you, he was there, in the lifeboats, in the final moments of a father hugging his children goodbye, in the calm voice of a steward helping a stranger find a way out. In the melody of a hymn sung over the roaring wind, God was not absent. He was near, nearer than the icy waters, nearer than despair. The Bible tells us in Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And I believe he was there in the stillness, offering a peace that the sea could not drown. And let me say this too: the tragedy of the Titanic shook the world, but it also woke the world. Laws were changed. Lifeboat regulations were rewritten. Radio equipment became mandatory, and crews were trained to stay at their posts. The pride that once declared a ship unsinkable gave way to a more humble awareness. We are fragile, and we are dependent on one another, and on something higher. But don't wait for tragedy to teach you that. Don't wait for your own ship to break apart before you ask yourself the hard questions. Who are you when the decks are tilting? Who are you when the music stops? Because make no mistake, every one of us will face our Titanic moment. It may not be a collision with ice, but it will be a collision with truth. You may lose your job. You may bury someone you love. You may be told by a doctor that your time is short. And in that moment you will have to decide, will I sink with the world, or will I rise with the one who conquered the grave? Let me tell you a story, true and beautiful. There was a man named John Harper aboard the Titanic. He was a widowed preacher traveling with his young daughter. When the ship began to sink, he put his daughter in a lifeboat and turned back to the crowd. He didn't search for comfort. He didn't cling to wealth. He moved from person to person, asking, "Are you saved? Do you know Jesus?" And when the ship went down, John Harper didn't go down in silence. Survivors said he clung to wreckage, still calling out to men in the water, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you shall be saved." His voice was the last sound some ever heard. Now that, my friends, is the voice of a man who knew what mattered most. Not safety, but salvation. Not comfort, but calling. And what about us? Are we living for what truly matters? Are we sharing our hope while the world still has time to listen? Because you and I, we are not promised smooth sailing, but we are promised a captain who knows the sea. Now I ask you, in the quiet of your heart, what will your life leave behind? The Titanic lies beneath the Atlantic still, rusted, broken, haunted by silence. Her grand staircases are no longer polished by the steps of the proud. Her chandeliers no longer sparkle beneath velvet gowns. The cold has claimed her, and yet her voice still echoes, like a sermon carved into the seabed. She speaks not of disaster alone, but of warning and, yes, of redemption. You see, even from the depths, the story rises. It rises in the faces of those who gave their lives so others might live. It rises in the melody of "Nearer, my God, to Thee," a song not of surrender, but of drawing near to something eternal. It rises in the courage of the crew, the devotion of the mothers, the prayers of the faithful, the sacrifice of strangers who looked fear in the eye and answered with love, and it rises in you, because you too are sailing through life. Your ship may look different, your burdens may not be forged from steel, but you have a voyage and you have a choice, to live with pride or to walk in humility, to chase status or to serve others, to fear the unknown or to place your hand in the one who calms the sea. I do not bring this story to you to sadden your spirit, but to awaken your soul. For this world is filled with distractions, and too many of us are sailing full speed ahead, unaware of the icebergs beneath our path. Too many of us are trusting in ships that cannot weather eternity. Too many have lifeboats still unused, truths we've heard but never embraced, promises we've seen but never claimed, but it's not too late. It is never too late to change your course. The God who was there on that night in 1912 is the same God who is here tonight. He does not dwell in history, he dwells in hearts. He is not buried beneath the waves, he walks on them. He is not silenced by tragedy, he speaks through it. So ask yourself, have you prepared for your crossing? Have you set your anchor deep, not in the sand of comfort, but in the rock of salvation? Have you lived in such a way that when your ship sinks, and all ships do, you will rise? Because the final truth is this: the Titanic was called the ship of dreams, but dreams not grounded in truth will always sink. Let your dream be eternal, let your hope be unshakable, let your soul be ready. For though the sea may roar, though the night may come, there is one who waits on the other shore, arms open wide, not to judge, but to welcome you home.